when you open the door for somebody else.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob. We are here for our exciting part 2 with the incomparable Bobby Kennedy Jr. If you missed part 1, definitely go back to the podcast, find our part 1 and listen to that. A lot of amazing stories and great information there. And we're going to continue today talking a little more about Bobby's work. You end up taking this career in environmental law that was somewhat influenced by your uncle as well, and it leads you to this discovery about mercury, and then you find yourself teaming up with Eric Layden. Do you want to take that question?
Yeah. I'm kind of curious. I think that's when I saw you come on to the stage, I think of the vaccine fight is to fight mercury. But then when Eric came out, with his movie Trace Amounts, and I think you were heavily involved in that. I'm kind of curious. And then you guys founded, the World Mercury Project, which then became Children's Health Defense. I'm kind of curious. You talked a lot about mercury already, and obviously that was a problem. When did you kind of come to the realization that it's not just mercury, that it's kind of like the whole, a lot of different aspects of vaccination? So when did that light bulb go off in your mind, and how did you come to that conclusion?
I knew that there was, very early on, that there was a lot of questions about vaccine safety. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about the fact that vaccines are not safety tested. Mm-hmm. And really didn't learn that until, much later. But I knew that there were enough people talking about, there were enough mothers who saw their kids injured by just the MMR.
Mm-hmm, which doesn't have mercury and never has.
Doesn't have mercury. You can't ignore, people say, well, that's just anecdotal, but,
right.
Science is built upon case studies.
Totally.
And one mother who has an injured child is a case study. And if you have 10 mothers who say the same thing,
right.
And, that's something that should be looked at with other science. And if you have 10,000 who are saying that. So, but it was unclear to me. The science was unclear because, the MMR is not given in a vacuum. The MMR normally was given with other vaccines.
Sure.
Right.
And those vaccines could have been mercury. And maybe those moms had seen something that they assumed was the MMR because that was the best known vaccine, but actually it came from the DTaP or hepatitis B that are given at the same time. Science was very hazy, but I knew in my mind that there was a lot of people who believed it was the MMR and that you can't just dismiss that moms,
right.
My son I have a son who was food allergic and is anaphylactic to the state of peanuts, but he had many, many food allergies that he was born with. He had severe asthma. He had 29 hospital visits by the time he was 2 years old, emergency room visits. So, and my wife could put her hands on him, and she would be able to immediately identify, that he was wheezing, which I could not tell. I couldn't tell when he was wheezing. Mm-hmm. She could look at him, and then she could put her hands on him and say he's wheezing, and she was always right. She also was able to immediately identify the allergen, the source of the allergy, every time. And it was almost eerie and kind of magical to me that she was able to do that because I'm much more, I have a much more methodical approach and a scientific approach to things, and she had an intuitive approach to it. But I couldn't deny that her intuitive approach was working.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, I'd been working on the Hudson for many years and on scientific issues. And there were often things about the Hudson that the fishermen knew, because I represented commercial fishermen. That's how I got into this. That nobody in the science divisions at Department of Environmental Conservation or EPA knew, and that they would deny. And I remember one issue where the fishermen were telling me there's got to be chlorine going into the Wallkill Creek right now because there's goldfish in the Wallkill Creek, and nothing kills goldfish, but all the goldfish are dying. And it has to be the only thing that can kill them is chlorine. And I went up and spent weeks with the DC saying, is it possible there's any chlorine in Wallkill Creek? And they all said, no, there's no source of chlorine. Not only that, but there are no goldfish in the creek. Some of these fishermen made a living catching goldfish for collectors because we have the largest goldfish in the world in the Upper Hudson. The DEC didn't know about it. So I had in my mind the capacity to believe, although I had a very, very strong scientific affinity, that people who were living their lives and had a stake in some aspect of life might know more about it than the scientists knew.
Yeah.
Right? And I also had one of my best friends was a doctor, and he used to tell me that it was scientifically proven that being in the cold did not give you a cold. But I could watch my kids swimming in an outdoor pool in the wintertime, and they would get colds like clockwork. And I was like, that's just not true. Being in a cold, it may not have the bacteria, but it does something to you that makes you vulnerable to getting a cold. And so I knew that, the scientists are not all, science is always right, but the scientists are not always right. And there's a big difference between the scientific establishment and established science.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, that's fascinating. And we sort of learn to listen to the parents, listen to the moms and the families affected by things.
Well, like we always say, enough anecdotes eventually become data.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. You can have, when you have the same story happening over and over and over again, you cannot ignore that this is now information to look at. And who is going to know these children and what's happening to them better than the people that are with them all of the time, which has been a huge issue for me, is that these mothers are never believed. When it comes to doctors know, but mothers, what could they possibly know? It's like we're literally with these children 24 hours a day. We know them, and maybe you can't explain why you know them, but you do. And enough mothers are seeing the same thing happening. Something should be done.
Right.
Yeah. And it was the AAP Red Book. And on CDC's website it says, listen to the mom.
Yeah.
Like repeatedly.
Yeah.
That's the first thing you do. Listen to the mom on every other issue except for vaccine.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So you eventually built Children's Health Defense, children'shealthdefense.org. That's your primary nonprofit route of reaching the world and reaching people with vaccine information. I'm kind of curious, to what extent is Children's Health Defense your full-time job and mission versus are you still or are you mostly full-time involved in litigation and legal issues and pursuing environmental law as well and vaccine law? Kind of what's the balance in your life, in your professional life?
Well, all the vaccine stuff I do is with Children's Health Defense.
Right.
And we have a larger portfolio. Children's Health Defense is doing 5G, and we're doing fluoridation, and we're doing glyphosate. So all of these toxic exposures to kids, not just vaccines. And as you know, our kids today, it's not just the vaccine that's injuring them. They're walking around, they're swimming around in a toxic soup.
Yeah.
That the boomer generation created for them.
Right.
And so we're trying to address all of those exposures. And then, I also work, I feel like I do have more than one full-time job. I also work, full-time for Waterkeeper.
Okay. Wow. So you're just constantly busy. Yeah. Well, we recently here in California, you were a big part of the fight against SB 276, and there were almost, almost kind of feel sometimes tired of talking about it now, but now that it's over, now that we kind of temporarily lost that fight, I'm kind of curious about your conversation with Governor Newsom. And I've spoken with another friend who also had a conversation with Governor Newsom, and what was your experience with the governor? And I guess kind of what I'm wondering is, was he really against this bill? Was he really against this huge step across the line? And if he was against it, why do you think he wasn't able to stand up to it? Is our party politics and is the party line just that powerful that even a governor can't cross it?
Listen, I don't know, because I can't look into somebody else's head. Mm-hmm. But my impression from my conversation, which was long and detailed, and Governor Newsom had a clear idea of the problem with vaccines, and I feel like he was on our side on the issue and did not want to sign this legislation. And politically, putting myself, and again, I'm not trying to defend Governor Newsom, I'm just answering your question about what I think the rationale was. I think that it wasn't party loyalty. I think that if he had been able to veto this and the veto would have stuck, that I think he would have vetoed it. But I think it was a combination of things, that it was a unanimous vote in committee, then it was a unanimous vote by the Democrats, party line vote, and that it was, when a vote is delivered with that kind of clarity, the Democratic Party had the ability to override his veto, and that he was convinced they would do so, and that he would hold himself up to exposure without getting any benefit from it. And I think, and then you add to that every newspaper editorial page in the state was against him, was against us, and then the volatility of the issue, which is that anybody who stands in the way of this, the next time there's a measles outbreak, and God forbid somebody dies of measles, that the finger is pointed directly to that person. So I think it's it was a radioactive issue, and I think it was a freight train because of the cowardice and of the Democratic Party. That it was going to run him over anyway. So I think he decided to get on the train rather than stand in front of it. Well, and again, I'm not defending him. All I'm doing is speculating about about the calculations that he was making.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to get that insight. I'm kind of curious, you had a similar conversation with President Donald Trump a few years ago. My question, I don't know to what extent you can divulge, that conversation with the president.
I haven't divulged the whole thing.
But I'm kind of curious, what was your impression of the conversation? Did you get any sort of idea if the president is open to vaccine injury awareness, and is he against mandates? But then do you feel like we haven't seen anything from him after this, and is the president really kind of powerless to kind of influence this whole big pharma government?
No, if the president wanted to do it, it would be done.
Okay, well, take us through
anybody who says that President Trump could not do this does not understand the presidency, and the power of the presidency, and this is an easy thing to do. There's a million ways, and we talked to Trump about this. He doesn't even have to come out for or against vaccines. All he has to do is order a study, order the vaccine safety database opened to independent scientists, that other people could look at them, order his agencies to do a proper study. which, he could bring in other people, outside consultants, independent consultants, this kind of thing that Bill Thompson recommended, that Institute of Medicine has repeatedly recommended. Compare vaccinated to unvaccinated populations, look at the entire vaccine schedule, all the things that the Institute of Medicine has already said he ought to do.
Yeah.
He'd be taking zero political risk to do it. And he can do it in an instant. And he knows that. And we had a very frank discussion about that. And he was going to do it. And then at one point, he decided not to do it. But we met repeatedly we met with the president. I met with the president, with Steve Bannon, with Hope Hill, with Reince Priebus, with the president's two sons, and with Kellyanne Conway, and it was clear that the president knew that vaccines were dangerous. He said he had three people who were close friends, three women who were close friends, one in this building right now, he told me, who had children who were perfectly healthy, were given a vaccine, and that got autism from the vaccines. I don't think, I know that he has no doubt in his own head that the vaccines are causing the problems. He then put us into meetings, myself, Lynn Redwood, and Dell, who I, brought into this process. And we went to meetings with all of the big agency heads, including Tony Fauci and Francis Collins and all the people at NIH and CDC, and we met with them. And when we went in there, we had the White House behind us.
Wow. Okay.
And they were terrified. And they were, at attention. And then at one point, about 3 months into his administration, the White House went dark. And we were basically told the president no longer has any interest in this issue.
Wow.
And then he brought in Gottlieb, he brought in a bunch of lobbyists from pharma to run the agencies who were full on, vaccinate everybody that you can. And, you don't have to make those kind of appointments. I get kind of skeptical at people who are continuing to defend the president on this and say we have to wait to the next term, or there's so many people against him, or our president's power is limited by the deep state. That's all baloney. The president could do this, and it's not even a heavy lift. It's not even a light lift for him. It's just it's an executive order. He doesn't have to go to Congress. He doesn't have to use up any political capital. He just has to stand up to pharma and say, we're going to do these studies, right? And that's all we asked for. We said, just do the studies.
So where is his pressure coming from? Do you think that's enough pressure
I can't look into President Trump's head, but I think he is more, and I see this with him on the environmental issue too. He didn't need to be, full-blown oil. Rex Tillerson publicly voted against him. The Koch brothers gave millions of dollars to try to defeat him. Why does he come in and approve the XL pipeline and, appoint an oil man to run the State Department and appoint oil men, as the head of all his departments, all of the, the ministries of the Secretary of Interior, at EPA, at Commerce, which runs fisheries. It's all people who are from the industry. Why does he do that? I think President Trump is comfortable with people who are very powerful people and who are industry insiders. And I think that, but again, and I'm not trying to slander President Trump. You asked me what I think is going on, and I'm telling you I don't know. All I can tell you is there's a consistency on both sides. You know, I'm fighting on the environmental side and I'm fighting on the pharmaceutical side. And the way that he treats pharmaceutical companies is the same way he treats the big polluters. He makes them run things, puts them in charge. So, you know.
Well, having said that, when we know that the medical establishment is so driven and backed by pharmaceutical companies, do you think in your lifetime we will see the end of this pharmaceutically driven medical establishment?
Yeah, I think so. I think our litigation is going to bring them down. I think, you know, I have enough cases in the pipeline now, and I've been doing this for 30 years, and I know that, you know, it's like fishing in some ways. You have a lot of lines in the water. You know, a couple of these initiatives, we've been able to attract now the best law firms, the biggest law firms in the country. And they would not be involved, for example, in our Gardasil case unless they smelled blood in the water, unless they thought, you know, this is a, you know, $50 billion lawsuit. You know, and that's why they're in it. They're not in it for, you know, for one client. They're in it because they think that this is going to bring down this industry, that they're going to get into the wheelhouse, they're going to get into the file cabinets, and when they do that, you know, the whole thing's going to collapse. And I can tell you that's what's going to happen.
And you think litigation is the way to get there. What about for American families or advocates and activists? What is it, do you think? What would be your advice on what they could be doing to help support this?
We're going to win this on the streets, and we're going to win it in the courtroom. That's why we might win it in one or two state capitals, but Congress is completely owned by this industry. And the media are owned by this industry, and the social media are owned by this industry. So there's battlefields we can't even fight on anymore.
Right.
People, you know, and Children's Health Defense is sending out action alerts and trying to organize, you know, and support the local groups in all the different states, and to help them coordinate their activities so that we can send out action alerts to hundreds of thousands of people and say, we need you to show up on the streets. We need you to write letters or send emails to this person or that person, the other person, and organizing really a national movement for the first time. And we are growing in strength, and we're growing in power. And everybody knows we're not going to go away. We're on the horizon. They're never going to get rid of us. And the more they overreach, the stronger that we're going to get, and the more, you know, more soldiers we're going to have in our army. And we're going to keep building it. But we're going to win ultimately with a pincher movement on the street and in the courtroom. And those are the two places where we can win this battle, and we will win it. You know, it's just a matter of time and resources. The more resources that we have, the more bandwidth we have, the more lawsuits I can file. And we have about a dozen lawsuits right now that we could file, and any one of them will bring them down. You know, so it's really for us bandwidth. It's having enough attorneys working, you know, for Children's Health Defense and other groups who are going to file these suits, and, you know, eventually we're going to beat them.
Is there one particular upcoming suit, and I don't know if you can even share this information, but something that has you the most excited that you think is really going to, besides that?
There is, but I'm not going to talk about
right.
those. You know, there are a couple suits that have me most excited, but I'm not going to talk about those now.
Right.
But I think the Gardasil case that we have in California is potentially a case that could bring down the industry.
Okay.
Wow.
And Children's Health Defense, again, it's a .org website, and that's really the main place that people can follow you.
They can follow me on Instagram too.
Okay. What's that? Is it?
This is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Okay, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on Instagram. I don't Instagram, so
His Instagram is super
right into the 21st century.
It's super entertaining too. I mean, he travels everywhere. He does all these fun things. It's informative. It's entertaining. It's definitely worth following.
So people can definitely support you. They can donate to Children's Health Defense. You're a nonprofit organization.
Donate, but even more important, join up.
Join up.
I mean, let me put it this way. They're equally important, but join up because we need your name. We need to be able to, ask you whether you'd be willing to be a plaintiff in a lawsuit. We need to be able to reach your community to organize, like when I come to the community to organize events for us. And and to stay informed, and we will inform you through those websites.
Yeah.
We will, we have solid science on there. Everything is double checked and sourced, and we make sure that we're funneling to the community the highest quality science,
Right.
so that people don't make mistakes that they can then come back at us with.
Right.
And it's a source for the science, and it's a source for for the activism.
Well, Bobby, something as a historical buff myself, I guess I just love learning from history, and a lot of what we're dealing with today is about pharmaceutical corruption and the partnership between the pharmaceutical industry and the government, and learning, going back, what is it, 50 years now? Your uncle, your President John F. Kennedy, and your dad, who was the Attorney General under him. They really took on a lot of corruption in the government. They took on the mafia and the partnership of the union and the mafia. They fought for civil rights. They helped bring about a desegregation and get the Civil Rights Act passed. And there's so much amazing work they did, and I'm kind of curious. How often do you kind of think back about what you saw your uncle and your dad working through? You were a child back then, but you got to witness a lot of this, and how did they find the courage to stand up to corruption? And does this motivate you, to keep doing the work you're doing now? And I'm kind of, as a follow-up, maybe after, if they were here today, how do you think they would, had this, hit pharma head on to bring about the end of this corruption?
Well, probably the best analogy for, of the battle with pharma is what they did with the steel industry, where they, the steel industry, was. At that time, they were scared about rampant inflation, and the biggest source of inflation was the steel industry, which fed into the automobile industry and a lot of other industries, and it was critical to the American economy. And there was rampant and galloping inflation in the steel industry, and my uncle went into all the unions and got them to agree to hold down their demands on wages. And then he went to the 6 big steel makers and got them to agree to reduce or to hold prices steady. And their reward for that would be the unions wouldn't be asking for raises in wages, and the industry all agreed. And then the CEO of U.S. Steel asked for a meeting with my uncle a few days after the agreement was announced. And he told my uncle, we've decided to go in a different direction. We're going to raise prices. And my uncle and the three biggest steel producers all broke the agreement. And my uncle first called the head of the union and said, we've been screwed and you've been screwed. And, we're going to make sure they don't screw our country. And then he sent the FBI over to raid there. My father was the head of the Justice Department. the agreement between them to simultaneously raise prices was evidence of an antitrust conspiracy.
Right.
Immediately filed antitrust papers against those three companies. They sent FBI agents in to bring the CEOs out in handcuffs. They put their file cabinets on dollies and walked them out of the office, and nothing like this had ever happened where the American government had declared war on corporations. And then my uncle did something that they really couldn't believe, which was he canceled all of the U.S. military contracts with those three companies. And he gave the contracts to the three companies that had not broken the agreement.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And he told the military, if you can't give it all to those three companies, then give it to foreign companies, but don't give it to those three. And, they came whimpering back to the table, and the Wall Street Journal and all the other big financial interests, Wall Street papers, were in shock and condemned Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy for this terrible affront to the civil rights of corporations. And my uncle's attitude was, they're corporations, they're not human beings, they don't have rights, and they, their only right to survive is if they serve the public interest. Every corporate charter is based upon that these corporations are created to serve the public interest, not to serve financial interests of their shareholders. They have to serve the public interest, or there's actually a corporate death penalty that, the attorney generals of various states have the right to cancel a corporate charter if they find that that corporation is not serving the public interest. So my uncle's response is, they're not human beings.
Yeah.
They're corporations. They were hurting our country. They don't have a right to anything. And it shocked Wall Street, and they declared war on them, and they never forgave them for it.
Yeah.
But to me, it's one of the things I'm most proud about, that they did.
And do you see your involvement in this issue as continuing a fight against corruption in industry, specifically as it relates?
I just think that listen, I'm in this because, like Bob said, and we know too much. You see, look, you see one of these kids with severe autism, and what would you do to prevent the suffering that you see? These kids are in pain for 20 years. They're screaming. They're pounding their heads against the walls because their brains hurt so much.
Right.
And these are kids who ought to be writing poetry. They ought to be, producing plays. They ought to be leading bands. They ought to be running for political office. They ought to be, working for newspapers, running big corporations. And instead, they're in diapers and a football helmet, pounding their head against a wall, and they can't speak, and they're never going to go on a date. They're never going to use a toilet. They're never going to be married. They're never going to earn money. They're never going to pay taxes. And what would you do to prevent that from happening to one of them? What would you sacrifice? What would you give up to save just one kid from that agony? And, and you look at it, compound that times million kids who are suffering like that. And, you don't have a choice. I mean, what we should do, we should burn our houses down and say, we're not going to do anything but this because, this is the apocalypse. And government and corporations have the power to force your kids to poison them, to forcefully poison an entire generation of kids with untested, zero liability medical interventions.
And so knowing what you know and knowing why you're doing this, does that not, just like all of us, does that make you angry that you get negative attacks or you get criticism or you have...
I don't care about that stuff. That's just part of that's part of doing this work. That's just... Yeah. If it was easy, it wouldn't, if it was easy, we wouldn't have any fun doing it anyway. It's, you do it because it's hard.
And even with friends and family and people that know what you're fighting for and still decide to take a stance that is different, even though of what you're saying.
I don't care. I honestly, I don't care about any of that. Listen, I have an amazing wife who loves me and supports me. I have 7 kids who love me and semi-support me. So I'm happy, and I have a great life, and I have a mission, and I'm going to do it. And I'm not going to let stuff get in my way. And anything anybody did that was decent throughout the history of mankind, they've had disapproval of their peers, their families, and everything else. You can't name a story of anybody that you admire that didn't go through that. So, to me, it's part of the gift.
I'm curious, Bobby, if you ever get to rest and take a break, because I know one thing I found interesting in your book was your grandpa basically, and all the Kennedy adults basically had this constant demand for industry. You said you had to fill all your free time with useful activity. And again, he kick you outside when he caught you watching TV. You wrote, your dad wrote later that your grandpa's purpose was to give his children a social conscience, that there were wrongs that needed attention. And so knowing that there's all this you have to do and all this work you have to do you ever get to rest? You said you take a walk for 3 miles every day. Is that your main source of rest, or what do you do to get away and just take a break?
I do, I do a lot of fun stuff. I do, I'm in the woods a lot. I'm out on the water. I surf. I train hawks, and I spend a lot of time in the woods with the birds, and I spend time with my kids. So I have a good life. I go skiing in the winter, and my life is great.
Can you turn your mind off when you're away, or is it always going?
I have a hard time sleeping.
It's hard for me too. Yeah. I wake up at 4 a.m. I'm like, okay, I got to write all this down. I just thought of this great idea. So you're the same way.
Yeah.
That's hard. It's hard to.
When I was 29 years old, I was sitting with a group of people, and I was like an office, and I picked up a Cosmopolitan magazine, and it said. There was an article that said that the average person falls asleep within 7 minutes of their head hitting a pillow. And I read it out loud like it was a joke. I thought everybody kicked the sheets for 2 hours with, the committee going in their heads, which is what I was doing.
Yeah.
And everybody in that room said, yeah, that's about right for me.
Well, then everybody must be overtired.
Right. That was the first time I realized that it wasn't normal what was happening in my brain.
Well, well, God bless you. And is there anything else you want to do?
Oh, I'm sure we have so many things.
A million more things.
As we know, he's a busy man on his way to busy things. And we're just grateful for this time. And maybe we can do this again sometime if there's something to talk about.
There's a lot of stuff I would love to ask you. About you. About your past and your family and your current work. But again, people can go to childrenshealthdefense.org. There's some great free downloadable books on there, especially a fantastic little book on conflicts of interest and the effects that's having on how it's undermining children's health. I just read that book the other week, a fantastic book. And
I also have a series of children's books.
Okay, right.
On history, and I have one on St. Francis of Assisi by Hyperion. And
wow.
I have a number of other books on heroes of American history.
Okay, and that's all, they can find all of those on childrenshealthdefense.org, right? That's fantastic, because to me, I'm a huge reader, and that's, I always have probably 2 or 3 books going, and sometimes it's a historical fiction. I love historical fiction, but I love reading history, and that's how we learn. And
definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bobby. Thanks for coming. I know you have something to go to tonight. You're down here in this area for an event, and so I'm glad that you're able to stop by here on your way there. And we'd love to have you back. People, would just love to hear a lot more.
Maybe we'll convince you to come back a second time.
Absolutely, easy to convince.
All right.
Thank you for all that you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're an inspiration for so many people, even the ones who've been doing this a really long time. So I am very excited for this and look forward to the next time as well.
Great. And we'll see everybody next time on the Vaccine Conversation.
We're gonna be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, be the peace we wanna see in the world. Yeah, be the love we wanna see in the world. Be the joy we wanna see in the world. Be the change we wanna see in the world.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.